I still remember the sound of the rain fat, relentless drops pounding against the diner's roof like a drumline with no end in sight. It was 2016, the town of Marlow was flooding fast, and no one knew how long we'd be stuck. The lights flickered every so often, casting strange shadows over the old vinyl booths. I sat near the window, watching the water crawl up the curb, my cell phone useless in my hand. No service. Not a single bar. That's when he walked in, soaked to the bone, with a lopsided smile that somehow made the storm outside feel less threatening. Nathan. He shook out his jacket by the door, apologized to no one in particular, and sat 2 stools down from me at the counter. I remember glancing at him just as he pulled out a deck of cards from his backpack, like it was something he always carried, just in case of emergencies like, say, being stranded by a natural disaster. "You play?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Only if you're okay with losing," I'd shot back, unable to help the grin tugging at my mouth. And that was it. We played rummy until the cook turned off the grill, and then we kept playing by candlelight when the power finally gave up. I don't even remember who won, probably him, though I never admitted it, but what I do remember was laughing so hard my stomach hurt. At one point, I looked up from my hand of cards and realized I felt safe. In the middle of a flood, with a stranger whose jeans were dripping on the floor, I felt seen. The roads didn't clear until morning. We parted with an exchange number scribbled on a napkin and promises to meet up for coffee once the town dried out. I half expected it to dissolve, like the ink on that napkin. But a week later, he called. A month later, we were officially dating. 2 years later, I stood under a canopy of string lights in my mother's backyard, saying vows I'd written with shaking hands. We danced barefoot on damp grass that night, and he whispered that he'd never felt luckier. 6 years later, our daughter Lila was skipping through the house with a tutu around her waist and jelly on her face. Our everything. We moved into a modest house on the east end of Marlow, nothing fancy, but it had a big yard and windows that caught the morning light just right. Nathan worked long hours in construction management, and I stayed home part-time, picking up freelance bookkeeping jobs when I could. We agreed on that arrangement together. Nathan even insisted on it after Lila was born. He wanted me to be present for her early years, and I wanted that too. At least, I did then. Lila had his dark eyes but my wild curls. She was all color and curiosity, constantly dancing to music that played only in her head. Every day was a new costume, a new adventure. She talked to squirrels like they were old friends and made up songs about toast. She was the kind of kid that made people smile when they passed us at the grocery store. Nathan and I used to trade glances across the room whenever she did something ridiculous. Like, "Can you believe we made this little firecracker?" He used to kiss me on the temple when he left for work. Used to ask me what I wanted for dinner, even though I usually just said pasta. Back then, I clung to those memories like a lifeline. The diner. The card games. The storm. The way we laughed like nothing outside that booth existed. I needed to believe we were still those people. But time has a way of softening the edges, doesn't it? Little shifts, almost invisible at first. Fewer kisses, more silence. I chalked it up to stress. Work. Bills. The general chaos of raising a child in a town where the internet cut out if the wind blew too hard. Still, I held on. Even when the distance crept in like fog. Even when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Even when I found myself lying awake, listening for the front door long after he said he'd be home. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that all couples hit them. That we'd find our rhythm again, like we always did. Looking back, I think part of me knew something had changed. I just didn't want to name it. Naming it would make it real. So instead, I kept retelling the story. To myself, to Lila, to anyone who asked. About the flood. The diner. The cards and the laughter and how fate brought us together. Because that memory? It was still beautiful. And sometimes, when the ground under your feet starts to shake, you hold on to the one thing that felt steady. Even if it's just a story. Even if it's just a memory. Mommy, look. Lila twirled through the living room in mismatched socks and a sparkly scarf tied around her waist. Mia has real ballet shoes. Pink ones. Can I have some too? Please? I want to be a dancer like her. She was breathless, cheeks flushed, curls bouncing as she spun and leapt from the rug to the hardwood floor like the ground itself was a stage. I smiled, wiping my hands on a dish towel. It had been a long day, laundry, bookkeeping deadlines, a forgotten school form, but seeing her so alive, so lit up, made the fatigue fall away for a moment. "You want to take a dance class?" I asked. She nodded so hard it looked like her head might fly off. "Yes, Mia goes every Tuesday. They wear tutus and do warm-ups and everything. Her mom said I can go watch next time. Please, can I try? Just once?" I looked at her, arms outstretched like she was already performing for a full audience. She needed this. Not just the fun of it, but the outlet, the structure, the confidence. I saw myself in her, my childhood dreams that had lived in journals and daydreams, never quite given room to grow. "Okay," I said, crouching down to her level. "We'll look into it, all right? But no promises yet." She threw her arms around my neck and squealed, spinning again before dashing off to tell her stuffed animals the good news. I stood up slower than usual, back aching, a knot of worry already curling in my stomach. Dance classes meant monthly fees, registration, shoes, leotards. Things we hadn't budgeted for. Things Nathan wouldn't see as necessary. Still, I told myself this was worth fighting for. So when he came home that night, smelling faintly of beer and drywall, I brought it up. "Hey, Lila really wants to take dance lessons. Mia's been doing them and Lila's so excited. I thought maybe we could swing it, just a class or two to start." Nathan didn't even look up from his phone. He sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through a sports app, the light from the screen reflecting off his glasses. "Dance?" he said, a scoff catching on the back of his throat. "Do you know how expensive that crap is? Shoes, outfits, recitals. It's a whole thing." I leaned on the counter, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah, but maybe we can move some things around. I've got a new client starting next week, and I can take on a couple extra hours in the mornings." He finally looked up, his mouth pulled into a crooked frown. "You act like a few extra hours a week makes you some big contributor. Claire, we agreed you'd stay part-time so you could handle everything at home. Now you want luxuries too." The words stung sharper than I expected. "It's not a luxury. It's for Lila. And we both agreed that I'd go part-time after she was born. That wasn't just my choice." He shook his head and laughed, dry and dismissive, like I'd just suggested buying a yacht. "I swear, you stay home all day and still act like you're overworked." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not enough to shatter, not yet. But enough to hear the sound. I stared at him, trying to find the man from the diner, the one who once said he'd give our daughter the world, who called me his partner in everything. But all I saw was someone who looked through me now. Someone who saw price tags before he saw people. "I do work," I said, quiet but steady. "Just because it's not full-time doesn't mean it's nothing. And I manage this house, I raise our daughter." "Oh, spare me the speech," he said, pushing back from the table. "If you want her to dance so bad, figure it out yourself. But don't expect me to start cutting checks for tutus." He left the room before I could respond, footsteps heavy down the hall. I stood there, still leaning on the counter, feeling like I'd just been doused with cold water. "Figure it out myself." It echoed in my head as I wiped down the counters, as I packed Lila's lunch for the next day, as I folded laundry in the quiet of our dim bedroom. That same bedroom we once laughed in, dreamed in, made plans in. Now it felt like a room I rented from a stranger. Later that night, after Lila had gone to sleep curled up in her favorite blanket, I sat at the kitchen table alone. I opened my laptop, found the local dance studio Mia's mom mentioned, and looked up the prices. Not cheap, but not impossible either. I could take on more work. Maybe even pick up something in the evenings. A second job. I could make this happen for her because she deserved to have something beautiful in her life. Something that lit her up from the inside. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even her father, dim that light. The bell over the diner's door jingled with a hollow kind of cheer that didn't match how my legs felt by hour 5 of my shift. I wore the same smile I gave every customer, polite, tired, held together by willpower and caffeine. The uniform clung to me in all the worst places, and my feet were screaming from the cheap black shoes I'd dug out from a storage box in the garage. Still, I took the job. I had to. Lila needed those dance classes. And if Nathan wasn't going to support her dream, then I would pick up shifts until my body gave out if that's what it took. I worked the dinner rush 3 nights a week, sometimes Saturdays too. The tips were decent when tourists passed through town, less so when it was just the usual Marlowe crowd. I did it quietly, without fanfare or complaint, because I knew exactly how Nathan would react if I made it a big deal. He liked to pretend our life ran on autopilot. He'd never noticed when I stopped asking him for grocery money or when I quietly canceled a few subscription services we barely used. As long as his world stayed uninterrupted, he was fine with mine unraveling. And unravel it did. The tension between us became the background noise in our house. It sat between us at dinner. It followed us into bed, where we lay back to back in silence. His affection grew colder, his absence longer. Sometimes he'd leave after Lila was asleep and not return until the middle of the night. I'd hear the door creak open, the shuffle of his boots, the faint scent of something unfamiliar, sweet perfume or cigarette smoke he never used to tolerate. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Then came the mentions. Little things Lila said in passing that planted seeds of doubt in my already overworked mind. Daddy took me to the zoo today. I looked up from my spreadsheet, confused. What? He didn't say anything about the zoo. I packed your lunch like normal. She beamed, kicking her feet under the kitchen table. He said it was a surprise. We got popcorn, and he bought me a stuffed tiger. And his friend Vanessa came too. She gave me gum. My pen paused mid-scribble. Vanessa? Lila nodded, completely innocent. She has shiny hair. She wears dresses with flowers on them. She told Daddy he should let me get my ears pierced. I smiled through it, tucked it away. I'd never heard the name before, but I'd learned that asking Nathan direct questions only led to circular answers. Then there was the Barbie dream house. It showed up on a random Tuesday. I didn't order this, I said, frowning at the oversized box on the porch. It's for me. Lila squealed. Vanessa said I needed a mansion for my dolls. She said it with so much joy, like she thought Vanessa was just another one of Mommy's friends. Like the name belonged in our life. Later that night, I asked Nathan as casually as I could, keeping my tone even. Lila said you took her to the zoo with someone named Vanessa? He shrugged, not even looking up from the TV. Yeah, she's a coworker. She helped me pick up something for Lila. Big deal. A coworker who buys our daughter expensive toys? His expression hardened. Why are you always suspicious? She was just being nice. You think everyone who talks to me has a hidden agenda? I bit my lip. I'm just trying to understand what's going on. Lila talks about her like she's a regular part of her life. She sees her once in a while. Don't make it something it's not. That was the first time he used the word paranoid. He laughed when he said it, brushing me off with a shake of his head. I told myself not to cry, but the unraveling continued. I'd come home from the diner late and find Lila wearing new clothes I hadn't bought, little designer leggings, headbands with tags still attached. She started calling me Kara by accident, giggling when I corrected her. That's what Vanessa calls you sometimes. My blood ran cold the first time I heard that. Kara, Claire. Close, but not quite. Like I was slowly being replaced in my own daughter's mouth. At work, I stared blankly at receipts. Took orders on autopilot. People tipped me more when I smiled, so I forced it. But the more I smiled, the more I felt like someone else entirely. I wasn't Claire anymore. I was mommy to Lila, waitress to strangers, a roommate to Nathan, and apparently Kara to someone I hadn't even met. The weight of it all sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't have proof yet. Just a growing list of clues, gut feelings, and that increasingly frequent name, Vanessa. Always Vanessa. Something was happening behind my back. And for the first time, I stopped telling myself it wasn't. It was the 4th time that week Lila called me Kara. She giggled when I gave her that familiar, gently confused look. Silly me, she chirped, brushing it off like it was just another one of her imaginative mix-ups. But I wasn't laughing anymore. The first time had been strange. The second made me pause. The third and fourth started to feel like someone else was pulling the strings. "Sweetheart," I said carefully as I tied her shoelaces, "who's Kara?" She scrunched up her nose like I was the one who didn't get the joke. "That's what Vanessa calls you sometimes." There it was again. Vanessa. Always Vanessa. The name had woven itself into the fabric of our home like an uninvited thread, too tight to yank out without leaving a hole. She was everywhere in Lila's stories: shopping trips, car rides, zoo days. Her presence loomed in perfume I didn't wear and routines I hadn't approved. I tried to keep my face neutral. And, "What does Daddy say when Vanessa calls me that?" Lila shrugged, grabbing her backpack. "Nothing. He just laughs." I smiled for her sake and kissed her on the head, but inside, something cracked deeper. If he was laughing at that, what else was he laughing at? What else was I not seeing? That night, I brought it up to Nathan after Lila went to bed. He was watching TV, some action movie blaring, as he scrolled through his phone with disinterest. "Lila keeps calling me Kara," I said quietly, standing in the doorway. He looked up with that tired smirk that always made me feel like I was inconveniencing him. "It's just a slip. Kids say weird stuff all the time. She says Vanessa calls me that." He sighed like I was bringing up the weather too many times. So, that's not normal, Nathan. I don't even know this woman. And Lila clearly knows her more than I do. His jaw tightened. "Claire, you're reading way too much into this. Vanessa is someone I work with. She's been around when I've had Lila. That's it. Don't turn this into some paranoia spiral." I stepped into the room. Then why is she naming me something else? Why is Lila wearing clothes I didn't buy and talking about movie nights that you've never mentioned? He stood up then, towering over me slightly, not enough to intimidate me, but enough to remind me he was tired of the conversation. "Jesus, Claire. You always do this. You find one little thing and blow it up. You want to control everything, even the stuff I do with my own daughter." "No," I said, voice rising. "I want to know why I'm being replaced in her stories. Why this woman has a deeper role in her life than I even realized. I want to know why my 6-year-old thinks it's normal to call her mother someone else's name." He stared at me, eyes narrowing with practiced irritation. "You're losing it." Then he walked away. That was the night I came home early. The diner's dishwasher had broken mid-shift, and my manager sent me home an hour ahead of schedule. My feet were aching, my back sore, and all I could think about was collapsing into bed. But when I stepped through the door, everything inside me froze. Lila's laughter echoed from the living room. I followed the sound slowly, hesitantly, expecting to find Nathan maybe playing a game with her before bed. What I saw instead hit me like a punch to the gut. Lila sat cross-legged on the rug, wearing a sparkly new outfit I'd never seen, clearly not from Target or one of our hand-me-down bags. The fabric shimmered under the soft light. On the coffee table sat 2 empty popcorn bowls and a red box from a movie rental kiosk. Some animated princess movie I hadn't approved or known about. "Hey, baby," I said, trying to steady my voice. She turned with a grin, her mouth ringed with chocolate. "Mommy, you're home early. We had a movie night." I looked around. No sign of Nathan. No sign of Vanessa, either, but the air still held the faint scent of something floral and musky. Not my perfume. "Where's Daddy?" "In the garage," she said, then spun around to watch the end credits roll. Vanessa left already. There it was. As casual as if she'd said the babysitter. As if it were normal. I walked slowly to the garage door, heart pounding like a war drum. I opened it just enough to peek in. Nathan was there, sitting in the old lawn chair, scrolling through his phone again, a half-empty beer bottle beside him. He didn't even look surprised to see me. "Movie night?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Just took a long sip and set the bottle down. It was harmless. "She dropped by. Lila wanted her to stay." "You didn't think to ask me? To tell me? To maybe not let another woman tuck my daughter in and play house while I'm scrubbing plates for tips?" He rolled his eyes. "Jesus, Claire. Get a grip. She didn't tuck her in." We watched a movie. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even close. Because that night, something broke inside me. The gap between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was real. It had a name, a scent, a wardrobe for my daughter, a voice that called me Kara. And I realized I wasn't just being pushed out of Nathan's world, I was being replaced in my own. I didn't set out to be a detective. I wasn't nosy by nature, and I certainly wasn't one of those wives who memorized passwords and checked browser histories. I trusted Nathan once, completely. But trust doesn't survive long when your daughter slips up and calls you by another woman's name, or when movie nights happen without your knowledge and your husband shrugs off the truth like it's lint on his shirt. So I started looking. It began with the bank. Not our joint checking, he barely touched that one. It was the credit cards I noticed first. He'd added a new card 6 months ago, claimed it was for work travel. I'd believed him. But something gnawed at me now, a quiet urgency that grew louder each time I saw a mystery charge or caught Lila humming a tune from a movie I'd never shown her. I drove to the bank on my day off, heart pounding like I was doing something wrong. The woman at the desk smiled politely, her hands clicking over the keyboard as I gave her our account number. I just need to check some recurring transfers, I said, voice as calm as I could manage. Some of them don't look familiar. When the screen lit up, she tilted it slightly so I could see. My stomach dropped. There are monthly transfers, she explained, 2,200, regular as clockwork. Been going to this external account since last March. Can you tell me the name on the receiving account? I asked, my throat dry. Not without a court order, she said kindly. But the sender account is in Nathan Harmon's name. So unless he authorized it for a family member. She trailed off. She didn't have to finish. I already knew. $2,200. Every month. While he told me we couldn't afford ballet shoes for our daughter, he'd been quietly bleeding money to an account I'd never heard of. I thanked her, took the printed transaction history, and walked out into the cold with my hands shaking. I sat in the car for 10 full minutes, staring at the numbers. The name Vanessa wasn't there, not directly, but I felt her in every line of those transactions. I could hear her laugh, see her lipstick-stained coffee cup on our living room table. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. He was funding something. Someone. Back home, I waited until Lila was asleep and Nathan was in the shower. I opened his desk drawer and searched through the mess of paperwork he never bothered organizing. At first, it was the usual junk, old receipts, warranties, birthday cards. But then I found an envelope labeled FL Trip Docs. I opened it slowly. Plane tickets for 2 to Orlando. A hotel reservation under Nathan Harmon. And the signature that burned itself into my brain. Vanessa Harmon. Harmon. My last name. Her first name. Joined like they belonged together. I couldn't breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by evidence, 1,000 images rushing through my mind. The nights he said he was working late. The excuses about budget constraints. The gifts Lila received from someone she called Daddy's friend. The missed calls, the coldness, the way he looked right through me even when I stood in the same room. And then, just when I thought I had felt enough betrayal for one night, I found the deed. It was tucked inside a manila folder, behind some old tax returns. A property deed. A 2-bedroom condo downtown, recently purchased. The owner? Nathan Harmon. No mention of me. No mention of us. It felt like being slapped. While I was working myself raw at a diner to afford dance classes for our daughter, he was building a new life, brick by brick, lie by lie. I closed the folder, stood slowly, and stared at the man brushing his teeth on the other side of the bathroom door. What would I say? What could I say? Nothing. Not yet. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Instead, I gathered the documents, scanned them into my laptop, and saved everything to an encrypted flash drive I kept in my purse. I printed copies, too, and hid them in my coat lining. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw the papers in his face or scream or cry, because I was no longer asking for the truth. I had it, and now it was mine to use. I lay awake that night, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He was inches from me, but we might as well have been separated by miles of silence and deceit. I used to think love was enough. That memories and a child could tether people together, even when the world tugged hard. But love isn't supposed to feel like betrayal soaked in pretty lies. And now, the next move was mine. By the time the leaves began to fall and Lila started humming Christmas songs too early for comfort, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to be the woman who simply stood still while her life was hollowed out around her. I had let Nathan write too many chapters of my story in secret. Now, I was picking up the pen. I didn't tell him I found the bank transfers, or the hotel receipts, or the condo deed. I didn't tell him I knew about Florida or Vanessa's last name, our name. I didn't have to. I was no longer interested in begging for the truth. My energy was focused on building something steady beneath my daughter's feet. The first thing I did was adjust my hours at the diner. I picked up a consistent weekend brunch shift and gave up the late-night closings. It meant tighter money, but more time with Lila, and that trade was worth it 100 times over. I missed her too much when she was asleep before I came home. I hated how she'd started asking if I was going to miss her dreams. I told her I'd be home for more dinners now. Her face lit up like I'd promised her a trip to the moon. Then I did something that felt like breathing again. I enrolled her in dance class. I used my own savings. Not much, but enough to cover the registration, the uniform, and the first few months. Watching her hold the soft pink slippers to her chest like they were made of gold made every exhausted double shift worthwhile. The studio was a converted church with sunlight streaming through stained glass, and a row of little girls trying their best not to fall over. She looked right at home there, like her joy had been waiting all this time for a place to land. I stood in the back during her first class, holding back tears as I watched her twirl, clumsy and radiant and entirely hers. Vanessa hadn't given her this. Nathan hadn't made it possible. I did. I began documenting everything. Quietly, carefully. I scanned every receipt, every credit card statement, every text message I could catch glimpses of. I created a folder labeled Work Docs and uploaded it all to a private drive. I photographed the condo deed and even managed to get a few shots of the hotel bookings with Vanessa's name in the reservation details. I had dates, locations, paper trails. My laptop became a fortress of secrets. My phone a vault. I even stashed a second flash drive inside the lining of Lila's old diaper bag, folded beneath the tiny onesies I could never bring myself to throw out. And still, I said nothing. Nathan noticed something was different, but he couldn't quite place it. I smiled more, but not at him. I asked fewer questions. I stopped arguing. That made him uneasy. He started watching me the way you might watch a door you're not sure is locked. Subtle at first, asking what time I was getting off work, wondering who I was texting, poking around my bag under the pretense of looking for his sunglasses. I kept things where he couldn't find them. I knew better than to let him catch even a thread of what I was weaving. One night, he asked if we should take a vacation. Just the three of us, he said, like he hadn't been building an escape plan of his own in Florida. A vacation? I asked. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. It's been tense. Maybe we need a reset. Go somewhere quiet. Just be a family again. I stared at him. The man who once told me I was his home. Now offering to play pretend in another zip code. I didn't flinch. That sounds nice, I said. Let's talk about it soon. He smiled, and for a moment I saw relief flicker in his eyes. Maybe he thought I was folding. Coming back to him. Maybe he still believed I was too naive to notice when the house was burning. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That night, after he fell asleep, I watched him from across the room, his breathing steady, his limbs sprawled carelessly across the bed like nothing in his world was crumbling. I slipped into the hallway, past Lila's room, and into the kitchen, where I opened the drawer that held our family calendar. I circled one date. The day everything would change. The text came just after noon, while I was folding Lila's tiny tights and leotards into her dresser drawers. Can't wait to see you at the anniversary party next month. Vanessa sounds lovely. So excited to meet her. XO, Marilyn. Nathan's mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my hand frozen mid-fold. The words blurred slightly. I blinked them into clarity again. Vanessa. Sounds lovely. Can't wait to meet her. I sat down hard on the edge of Lila's bed, the soft mattress dipping beneath me. I could hear my daughter in the living room, humming to herself as she colored, blissfully unaware that her grandmother had just handed me the very moment I'd been waiting for. A family anniversary party. 40 years of marriage. Maple Hollow. The whole Harmon clan in attendance. And Vanessa, evidently, the special guest. My heart thundered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. This was it. The stage had been built. All I had to do was show up with the truth. I called my lawyer the next morning. I've been documenting everything, I told her, my voice low, even though I was alone. Bank records, credit card charges, property deeds. There's a second home. A second life. And now his mother's invited his mistress to a family anniversary party. There was a beat of silence, and then she said, "That's the setting we need. You won't even have to speak. Let the paper do it." We made a plan. She advised I gather everything into a concise, digestible packet: bank transfers, hotel stays, the condo deed, screenshots of text confirmations, even the vacation itinerary with Vanessa's name as Mrs. Harmon. We'd make clean copies. Chronological. Labeled. Unarguable. I spent the next week preparing the folder. I tucked one version into my purse, another into the lining of my coat, and left a sealed one with my attorney, just in case. I didn't tell Nathan I was coming to the party. He never explicitly invited me. He just assumed I wouldn't go, like I never went to his family's social events anymore. They were always stiff and performative, filled with too bright smiles and questions that made me feel like a guest in my own marriage. But this time I was going. Not as his wife. As his mirror. When the day arrived, I wore navy. A fitted dress that made me feel tall and composed. My mother came too, she insisted, and I was grateful for the steel in her spine as she helped sit me up and handed me a folder with steady hands. Lila clutched her glittery purse and skipped beside us, unaware of the storm brewing beneath my smile. I'd shield her from the worst of it. She didn't need to see the cracks, just the strength I was reclaiming. We arrived at the Maple Hollow in just before sunset. The foyer was strung with gold and ivory decorations, photographs of Marilyn and George through the decades displayed on easels. Nathan's siblings, cousins, and old neighbors swirled through the space like a social tide. Nathan was near the bar when he saw me. His entire expression dropped, just for a second. Then the mask went on. "Claire," he said coolly, approaching like we were distant acquaintances. I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it. You know how much your mother loves a full house." Before he could respond, Marilyn appeared beside him, cheeks flushed with joy. "I'm so glad you came, sweetheart," she said, hugging me tightly. "Lila's getting so big. And I can't wait for you to meet Vanessa. Nathan says she's just wonderful." I handed her the folder with both hands. "Actually, Marilyn, I brought something for you." She looked puzzled but polite as she accepted it, tucking it under one arm. "Open it later," I said quietly. "But please, make sure everyone hears it." I didn't wait for a response. I guided Lila to the dessert table, helping her pick out a cookie shaped like a tulip. And then Vanessa walked in. She wore a pale peach dress and heels too high for comfort. Her arm hooked effortlessly through Nathan's. She smiled like she belonged there. But then someone handed Marilyn a microphone. And the room shifted. "Before we begin dinner," Marilyn said, her voice warm and strong, "I wanted to thank you all for coming, and also share something important that was just brought to my attention." She held up the folder. I didn't breathe. As she flipped through the documents, the silence turned thick. Whispers began to stir like wind through trees. Vanessa's smile faltered. Nathan turned pale. Marilyn didn't say much, she didn't need to. She simply passed the folder to George, who raised his glasses, read the first page, and let out a low whistle. That was all it took. Nathan's sister crossed the room, eyes locked on Vanessa. "How long?" she asked coldly. "How long have you been sleeping with my brother while he was married?" Vanessa looked genuinely stunned. "He said they were separated." I watched it all like a movie I already knew the ending to. Nathan stammered. He tried to recover. Tried to place blame on me, on lies, on twisting the truth. But no one was listening anymore. I had brought the facts. And facts don't care about spin. The moment Nathan's mother opened the folder, the air shifted. Not in a dramatic movie scene way, but in the quiet, heavy hush that happens when something sacred breaks. The background music faltered, conversations thinned into strained whispers, and every pair of eyes in that elegant reception hall slowly turned toward the center of the storm. I stood near the dessert table, Lila beside me, nibbling at a sugar cookie shaped like a violin. I ran a hand gently through her curls, pretending not to notice the tension rising like a tide. My heart thundered, but I held myself still, composed, as Marilyn flipped through the pages I'd assembled so meticulously, each line, each statement, each receipt a thread unraveling the web Nathan had spun. She looked up from the papers, her face pale beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. "Is this real?" she asked quietly. Nathan's voice was barely more than a murmur at first, his words caught in his throat. I don't know what you're looking at." Marilyn's expression hardened. "Don't lie to me, Nathan." He reached out, maybe to take the folder, maybe to deflect the moment, but Marilyn stepped back, clutching it tighter like it was a shield. Around us, the clink of forks and glasses stopped entirely. All that existed was the rustle of papers, the rustle of truth, and the silent gasp building in everyone's throats. And then, like clockwork, Vanessa appeared. She walked through the double doors with a bright, practiced smile, her hand adjusting the strap of her handbag, completely unaware that her name was on every page in that folder. Her eyes found Nathan first. Her smile deepened. She didn't see Marilyn's face. "Not yet." "Nathan," she called, starting toward him. But then his sister, Melanie, stepped in front of her like a wall. "You might want to turn around and walk back out the door," Melanie said, arms crossed, voice low but cutting. "Right now." Vanessa blinked, confused. "What? Why?" "Because," Melanie continued, stepping aside just enough to let her see Marilyn and the packet in her hands, "your name is all over the mess my brother has made." Vanessa's gaze landed on the folder. She took a cautious step forward. "What's going on?" Marilyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "My son," she said, staring directly at Nathan, "has been leading a second life. With you. While still married to Claire. While raising a daughter. While lying to every single person in this room." A hush swept over the guests, then a ripple of disbelief. Some guests leaned closer. Others turned away, suddenly finding the wallpaper fascinating. But no one left. Vanessa turned slowly toward Nathan, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "You told me you were separated," she whispered. "You said she moved out. That she was bitter, that she was the one who didn't want to tell your daughter the truth yet." Nathan, for once, didn't have a rehearsed answer. His face was the definition of unraveling. "Vanessa, I just didn't want it to blow up like this. Not tonight." "Oh, now it's inconvenient?" Vanessa snapped, her voice rising. "After you bought me a condo and took me on vacations with your daughter? After I met your daughter, Nathan?" Lila looked up at me then, confused by the sharpness in Vanessa's voice. "Is that the Vanessa you said not to talk about?" I bent down beside her, keeping my voice soft. "Yes, baby. Let's go outside for a minute, okay?" She didn't argue. She clutched my hand tightly, and we walked slowly past the stunned faces and whispered exchanges. I didn't look at Nathan. I didn't need to. I had done what I came to do. Outside, the cool air was like a balm. I walked Lila to a bench under a maple tree just beginning to lose its leaves. "Mommy?" she asked quietly, swinging her feet. "Is Daddy in trouble?" I sat beside her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "He's made some choices that hurt people. And now we're making sure the truth comes out, that's all." "Is it because of Vanessa?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. Daddy made a mistake by not telling the truth. Vanessa didn't know everything either. Grown-ups mess up sometimes. But it's not your fault. And I'm going to make sure everything is okay for us, all right? She nodded slowly, resting her head against my arm. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the muffled tension behind the windows. I didn't need to go back inside. I had already shifted the balance. Let Nathan face what he'd created. Let him explain to his mother, his siblings, his lover. Let him try to untangle the lies now that I'd set them all on fire. Eventually, the party ended in a quiet, awkward fizzle. Marilyn came outside to hug me, her face stiff but full of apology. "I didn't know," she said. "If I had, Claire, I am so sorry." I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but understanding. "Now you do." Vanessa left without another word. Nathan tried to catch up to me as I buckled Lila into the car, but I shut the door before he could speak. "Claire, please. Let me explain." "You already did," I said calmly. "In your bank records, your hotel receipts, and your lies." Then I got in the car, turned the key, and drove away, not from a party, but from the illusion of a life that had already ended long ago. The silence after the party wasn't peaceful, it was loaded, thick with tension and unanswered questions. Lila sat in the back seat the entire drive home, quiet, hugging her stuffed tiger like it could shield her from the things she didn't understand. I glanced at her through the mirror, watching her innocence fight to stay afloat in waters far too deep for a 6-year-old. When we got home, I helped her into her pajamas, tucked her in gently, and sang the lullaby she'd loved since she was a baby. Her voice was small when she asked, "Is Daddy still coming home tonight?" I hesitated, brushing hair back from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. Not tonight." Because of Vanessa? I couldn't lie to her, not anymore. But I also couldn't let my pain become hers. Because Mommy and Daddy need to figure some things out. Grown-up things. But I promise you're safe and I'm right here. She nodded, but her eyes didn't close for a long time. When I finally made it to the living room, I sat on the couch in the dark, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the echo of Vanessa's voice, her disbelief, her betrayal. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt gutted. What had once been a marriage was now something jagged and broken, and even though I'd exposed him, even though I'd taken back control, the fallout was just beginning. Nathan moved into the condo that week. The very one he had bought for Vanessa. Whether she stayed there with him or not, I didn't ask. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Lila, keeping her grounded, keeping her whole. The first time she asked if she could go visit Daddy there, I nearly choked on my coffee. "Why does he live in a different house?" she asked, staring up at me with those big, curious eyes. "Is he mad at us?" "No, baby," I said gently, crouching in front of her. "Sometimes, when adults make big mistakes, they have to live somewhere else while things get worked out." "Can I see his new house?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't yet know what I was legally allowed to say. I had already contacted my lawyer again, and the papers were in motion. I was filing for divorce. And for temporary custody of Lila. Nathan didn't make it easy. He suddenly cared about his rights, about his image, about being a father. He wanted joint custody. Claimed I was manipulating Lila, turning her against him. He showed up unannounced one afternoon with a box of toys and a smile so forced it looked like it hurt. "I just want to talk," he said. "Maybe take her for a few hours." "No," I replied simply, blocking the door. "We'll do this through lawyers." He scoffed, his mask cracking. "Don't make this ugly, Claire. You already did." He glared at me for a long moment, then dropped the toy box on the porch and stormed off. I watched from the window as he pulled away in his truck, one I now knew was partially paid for by money he never declared to me. The legal process began in earnest. Paperwork. Court appointments. Mediation sessions that felt like sitting in a room with a stranger who used to know my secrets. He tried to paint himself as the devoted father, the misunderstood husband who just needed space. But the folder I'd handed to Marilyn now existed in court records. The timeline was clear. The finances were damning. And the condo, the deed in his name, purchased without my knowledge, became the cornerstone of his undoing. Still, none of it made it easier when Lila cried at night, asking why Daddy missed her dance recital. or when she drew pictures with 2 houses and 1 tiny girl in the middle. Her heart was too soft, too trusting. She didn't understand infidelity or deception. She just knew something had split, and she was standing on the fault line. I did everything I could to keep things normal. I made pancakes in funny shapes. We painted birdhouses and planted flowers in the backyard. I walked her to school and waited outside every dance class. I answered every hard question with as much grace as I could muster. When she finally asked, "Does Daddy still love me?" it was like my lungs stopped working. I held her close. "Of course he does, baby. That will never change. But why doesn't he come home?" Because love isn't always enough. Because he loved himself more. Because he built another life and assumed we'd never notice until he'd finished moving in. But I didn't say that. I said, "He's trying to figure things out in his own way. But Mommy's not going anywhere." I meant it. I was rooted now, even if everything else had shifted. The foundation Nathan and I had once built was cracked beyond repair, but I would build something new, for Lila, for me. Something steady, something honest. The fallout wasn't over. There would be more court dates. More questions. But the worst, the blind trust, the silent suffering, the denial, was behind me. Now, I was walking forward. And I was taking Lila with me. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting gold across the kitchen tiles as I poured Lila a bowl of cereal. She sat at the counter in her oversized dance sweatshirt, humming as she picked out the marshmallows. The house was quiet in that familiar, sacred way, just the 2 of us, safe in a world we were rebuilding day by day. It had been 4 months since the party. 4 months since Nathan's mask had been ripped clean off and I stopped trying to tape mine back on. I no longer felt the urge to explain myself to anyone. Not to him. Not to his family. Not even to the woman he tried to replace me with. What he'd done no longer held the power to twist me in knots. I had learned something radical. Peace doesn't come when they apologize. Peace comes when you stop pretending they ever will. I'd scaled back my diner shifts. Not entirely, but enough to be present. Enough to see Lila off to school every morning and pick her up after dance class without rushing in on tired legs and a plastic smile. My feet hurt less. My heart did too. What surprised me most wasn't how much better things got, it was how manageable it all became once I stopped bleeding myself dry trying to keep up appearances. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. I didn't need to dress up our dysfunction in politeness. The truth was loud and steady now, and I let it walk beside me without shame. The divorce proceedings were still in motion. Nathan tried to delay things, dragging out paperwork, sending emails that oscillated between charm and venom. One week he wanted to work on things for Lila's sake, the next he accused me of manipulating the court. My lawyer handled most of it. I let her. I no longer read his messages after 7 p.m. I drew a boundary and for once, I stuck to it. One afternoon, I stumbled on something else, an email tied to a side business Nathan had never disclosed. I found it in an old folder on our shared laptop, buried beneath invoices and domain receipts. He'd been funneling money into a separate venture for over a year, hiding profits under the name of a fake LLC. When I brought it to my lawyer, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Looks like he wasn't just lying about the affair." The betrayal ran deeper than the woman. It always had. Vanessa was just the symptom. The real disease had been festering for years, the lies about money, the control dressed as concern, the dismissiveness, the way he chipped away at my confidence one subtle dig at a time. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overreacted. He hadn't just broken our vows, he'd rewritten the rules without telling me. And I was done playing his game. One morning, I stood in the room that used to be our shared office and made a decision. I cleared the desk. I painted the walls a soft sage green. I strung paper lanterns and unpacked the craft bins I used to keep buried in the hall closet. It became Lila's art studio. A space to create, to dream, to be loud and joyful and messy. She beamed when I showed her. "You made this for me?" I nodded. "For us." Later that week, she came home from school and handed me a drawing, stick figures of the 2 of us holding hands beneath a rainbow. On the other side of the page, there was a small house with a red X through it. "That's the old house," she said matter-of-factly. "The one where Daddy made you cry." I knelt down, taking her face in my hands. "You're not supposed to carry that, sweetheart." She shrugged. But I remember. I didn't correct her. I didn't try to soften it. I simply said, "Me too." Healing wasn't a linear path. Some days, I still felt the weight of what had been taken. Some nights, I heard his voice in my dreams, twisting truths, making me doubt myself all over again. But then I'd wake up, see Lila curled beside me in the early light, and remember that we were here. We'd made it out. There was no more pretending. No more giving him credit for being a good father when his actions told a different story. No more nodding along when someone said, "He seems like he regrets it." Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. I spent my energy on dance shoes, on art supplies, on finding laughter again. On remembering who I was before the gaslighting and the silence. I wasn't just someone's wife. I wasn't just the woman he betrayed. I was Claire. I was a mother. A survivor. And finally, I was free. That morning, as Lila finished her cereal and ran off to find her shoes, I stood by the window and took a breath so deep it filled every part of me. The sun was higher now, spilling into our kitchen like a promise. We had a life to live. And this time, it would be one we wrote for ourselves.